The fading light stretched across the open plains, staining the sky in deep reds and dusky purples as the sun dipped lower behind the mountains. Eli Thompson, a man carved from the land he worked, guided his horse along the northern fence line. The creak of leather, the steady rhythm of hooves, and the whisper of the prairie grass were his only companions. He had been out longer than usual, and he was already thinking of supper when he heard it, a faint sound, fragile against the wind. At first, he thought it might have been a coyote's cry, but then it came again, clear enough to freeze his blood. "Please, help me." Eli sat tall in the saddle, every sense sharpened. His hand brushed the butt of his revolver as he turned his head toward the cottonwoods by the creek. The sound wasn't carried on the wind this time, it was closer, more desperate. He nudged his horse into a trot, then a gallop, following the cries through the grass that slapped against his boots. The closer he got, the more certain he became that this was no animal, no trick of the land. Someone was in real danger. When he broke through the trees, the sight made his chest tighten. A young woman crouched near the water's edge, half hidden in the roots of a fallen tree, clutching at them like they were her only anchor. Her dress was torn and smeared with mud, her hair tangled and plastered to her tear-streaked face. Her bare feet were cut and bleeding, proof she had run far. Her eyes lifted when she saw him, and they widened with something between fear and desperate hope. Eli swung down from his horse in a single motion, raising both hands in front of him. His voice was low, steady, the same tone he used to calm a spooked animal. "Easy now, I'm not here to hurt you." He stepped slowly, keeping his distance as he studied her. The girl's breath hitched, and then she pushed herself upright, stumbling forward before her legs gave way. She collapsed against him, trembling so hard he could feel her bones shaking through her skin. "They'll come back," she whispered against his chest, her voice ragged. "Please, don't let them take me again." Eli stiffened, his jaw clenching at the weight of her words. He didn't know who they were, but he knew enough. Someone had done this to her, and whoever it was wasn't going to stop until they finished what they'd started. He shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, shielding her from the night air and the world that had chased her here. She clung to the fabric, her fists curling as though it were a shield. Eli lifted her gently, his strength effortless, and carried her to his horse. With careful movements, he settled her onto the saddle and climbed up behind, keeping one arm firm around her to steady her. The ride back to the ranch was quiet but heavy with meaning. Every so often, she glanced over her shoulder into the darkness, as if expecting shadows to leap out and drag her away. Eli kept his eyes on the horizon, his mind already racing. He had seen fear before, but this was different. It wasn't just the fear of one night. It was the kind of fear born from a long chain of cruelty, the kind too many people in town had chosen to ignore. As his ranch came into view, the woman stirred faintly, her voice hoarse but determined. Why did you stop? You could have just ridden away." Eli tightened his hold, his voice steady as stone. "Because no one should cry for help and go unheard. Not while I'm breathing." She pressed her face into his chest, and though she said nothing more, Eli knew her silence was filled with gratitude and dread. He had offered her safety, but he also knew the truth. This wasn't just about one woman's rescue. Something darker had its roots in Dry Creek, something people were too afraid to name. And by taking her in, by listening to that cry for help, Eli had just placed himself at the center of a storm that had been brewing for far too long. The rancher's gaze hardened as the last light slipped beneath the horizon. Whoever had done this would not remain hidden in the shadows much longer. By morning, the news had already spread. Dry Creek was a town where whispers traveled faster than the stagecoach, and Eli Thompson's late-night return with a stranger hadn't gone unnoticed. Folks pretended not to stare as he walked into the general store with the young woman at his side, but their eyes followed every step. Mothers tugged their children closer, men cleared their throats and shifted uneasily, and the silence that hung in the air felt heavy enough to smother. Clara, as she had told him her name during the night, clutched his sleeve like a lifeline. Her dress was freshly laundered thanks to Eli's efforts, though the fabric still bore the marks of her rough escape. Her face was pale and drawn, but there was a kind of fragile determination in the way she lifted her chin. Eli's broad frame and steady presence shielded her from the stares, but he knew the moment she stepped inside the store, people would start to piece together truths they'd long avoided. Mrs. Keller, the storekeeper's wife, bustled forward, her hands wiping flour on her apron. She had a kind face, though her eyes flickered nervously between Clara and Eli. "Good morning, Eli," she said, forcing brightness into her tone. "And, who might this be?" Clara's grip tightened, and her lips trembled as she tried to form the words. Eli placed a steadying hand over hers. "Her name's Clara," he said firmly, his voice carrying just enough edge to warn off gossip. But Mrs. Keller's warmth softened the tension, and she crouched a little, her tone gentle. "Well, Clara, you look like you've had a hard night. You're safe here, child. No one's going to harm you." Something in those words cracked Clara's reserve. Her voice came low, shaking but clear enough for everyone in earshot to catch. "I worked at the mayor's house. I saw things I shouldn't have. When I told him I wouldn't keep quiet, he said they'd silence me forever." Her eyes filled with tears, but she pushed on, desperate for someone to understand. "I couldn't stay. I ran, but they followed me." The room seemed to freeze. A dropped tin clattered against the wooden floor in the back, but no one moved to pick it up. The townsfolk exchanged glances, fear tightening their faces. They all knew Mayor Calloway's grip on Dry Creek. He was the kind of man who smiled in public and stole in the shadows, the kind who punished anyone who dared to cross him. Whispers of corruption and cruelty had circulated for years, but no one had ever dared to speak his name aloud with accusation, until Clara. Eli straightened, his voice calm but strong. "She's telling the truth, and I'll stand by her until every last one of you knows it too." His words rang like a hammer strike, impossible to ignore. That was when the store's door creaked open. The light from outside spilled across the floorboards, and in stepped Mayor Calloway himself, flanked by 2 deputies. He was dressed in his usual tailored coat, boots polished to a shine, his smile a practiced mask that never reached his cold eyes. The air in the room thickened, every conversation dying on the spot. "Well now," the mayor said smoothly, his voice dripping with false charm. "What a surprise. Rancher Thompson, I hear you've taken in someone who doesn't belong. That girl," he nodded toward Clara with a casual disdain that made Eli's blood boil, "is trespassing where she shouldn't. Hand her over, and we'll forget this little misunderstanding." Clara shrank behind Eli, her fingers twisting the fabric of his sleeve, her whisper trembling with fear. "Please, don't let them take me." Her plea was so faint it might have gone unheard, but Eli caught every word. He stepped forward, placing himself firmly between her and the mayor, his stance wide and unyielding. His hand rested near his holster, not in threat but as a warning. His voice was low, steady, and resolute. "If you want her, Calloway, you'll have to go through me first." The store fell silent again, the townsfolk holding their breath. The truth, spoken at last, hung heavy in the air. And though fear still lingered, a spark had been lit, one that would not be easily extinguished. The saloon was packed tighter than Eli had ever seen. Word had spread of the mayor's so-called meeting, and curiosity, fear, and anger had drawn nearly every soul in Dry Creek to those creaking wooden floors. The smell of smoke and stale whiskey clung to the air, mixing with the low murmur of voices that died down the moment Eli walked in with Clara at his side. She was pale, her eyes darting nervously around the room, but she stood close enough to him that their shoulders brushed, drawing strength from his presence. At the far end of the room, Mayor Calloway leaned against the polished bar, a glass of brandy in his hand. His smile was the kind that never reached his eyes, smug and sharp-edged, the smile of a man who thought he owned everything he looked at. His deputies flanked him, arms crossed, their pistols visible. He raised his glass lazily when Eli approached. "Thompson," he drawled, "you've stirred up quite the fuss. Bringing trouble into town where it doesn't belong. I reckon it's time we put this nonsense to rest." Eli stopped in the center of the room, his broad shoulders squared, his voice carrying clearly. "The only nonsense here is the lies you've fed this town for years. Clara's not trouble, she's the truth you've been trying to bury." The crowd stirred, whispers rippling through the townsfolk. Clara stepped forward, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry. "He said he would kill me if I spoke. I saw him take money meant for families, steal land from widows, and worse, things he thought no one would dare repeat. But I saw it, I lived it, and I won't be silent anymore." The words struck the room like a gunshot. For a moment, silence pressed down like a heavy weight. Then a voice rang from the back, "Old Mr. Hayes," his face worn with years of hardship. "She's right, he took my farm, left me with nothing but dust." Another voice followed, a younger man whose fists trembled with rage. "He cheated us all, lied about the taxes. My brother lost his cattle because of him." The murmurs grew louder, anger swelling into something undeniable. Eli seized the moment, his voice cutting through the chaos. How long will you let him silence you? How long will you bow your heads while he steals from you, while he threatens your daughters and robs your sons? Tonight, you decide, fear or freedom. Calloway's smug grin faltered, the glass slipping slightly in his hand. His deputies shifted uneasily, seeing the shift in the crowd. The mayor's voice snapped, harsher now. Don't listen to them, she's a liar, and he's nothing but a fool of a rancher who doesn't know his place. But it was too late. The crowd was no longer afraid. A woman shouted from near the front, you ruined my husband with your lies. A man slammed his fist against a table. We've been slaves in our own town long enough. The air vibrated with the roar of people who had finally found their courage. Eli placed a hand over Clara's trembling one, grounding her as he faced the mayor. His voice was steady, ringing with conviction. Your reign is over, Calloway. You can't hide behind threats anymore. The truth's out, and these people won't bow to you again. The mayor looked around, realizing the crowd he had once controlled was no longer his. The deputies, sensing the tide had turned, exchanged uneasy glances, their loyalty shaken. Calloway's face hardened, but the fear flickered in his eyes, plain for all to see. Clara leaned into Eli, her tears slipping silently down her cheeks, not from fear this time but from relief. The words she had dreaded to speak were finally in the open, and they had given the town back its voice. The saloon roared with agreement, a wave of unity crashing through Dry Creek as years of silence broke apart. Eli lifted his chin, his hand resting near his heart, his vow carrying over the din. No more fear, not here, not ever again, and with that, the truth no one dared to speak became the truth everyone swore to defend. The mayor's grip had shattered, and for the first time in years, Dry Creek breathed free.